5 times Magic players outsmarted their opponent by choosing the perfect counter card for their deck. In Magic tournaments, besides your 60 card main deck, you get to have 15 sideboard cards when you play against your opponents.
Yeah, and that actually helps prevent certain archetypes take over the entire metagame because you can find that niche answer, and apparently Toffel's got some good ones for us.
Yeah. We start with one of the most loved or hated decks of all time. We start with Mill. Yes, there's no in between. It is black or white. Either you love it or you hate it.
I mean, this turn alone has been 39 cards, 40 if you count the land. Can't be that many cards left in the deck.
Yeah, there's like 3. So, yeah, he doesn't even need any more mill cards. That is an incredible draw from Josh Waddell. Like, I don't think you could have scripted it better than that.
I mean, yeah, there's like a singular game plan. You can see what's coming. They're gonna put cards into your graveyard.
Mill is very polarizing. Either you love milling your opponent and having this fun alternate win con, or you're rolling your eyes because you're just flipping all the cards you wanted to play into your graveyard.
The first time you interact with somebody who mills you out is like, what is happening? This is even allowed.
They mill 4 of your cards and you're like, haha, idiot, what is this gonna do? And then they mill another 10 and you're like, uh-oh.
Yeah, and people realized we don't want to lose to that strategy, but luckily there's one single card you can sideboard and it completely counters the whole idea. And those are the Eldrazi's from Rise of the Eldrazi, Emrakul the Aeon's Torn, Cozy Lake Butcher of Truth, or Ulamog the Infinite Gaia, and each of those, just one copy in your sideboard, no matter where it is. When it gets milled, all of your graveyard gets shuffled back into your library.
There's one issue. Whenever I do this, I draw it. And then it sits in my hand and it's useless.
Sometimes those decks have the chance to discard it as well, or you play maybe 2 of them if you really want.
But that's one where you feel really clever, because as long as you don't draw this card, all you need is you bring it up. Game 1, you lose to mill. Okay, you lost to mill. You bring it in, and as long as it's in your library, anytime they mill it, you're like, oh, I shuffle my graveyard back into my library.
There is also another thing they can do. They can exile your graveyard in response, in which case that's kind of a field bet, but that is a very specific thing they have to do. Yeah. Otherwise, they just lost all their progress.
And they still have to do that. Yeah, you can imagine your opponent is playing burn. Whenever you get to 0, you get to 20.
Unless they have like a Torment script.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. This has frustrated many mill opponents in Magic's history, which I think is a good thing, you know?
Moving on to number 4, if you sit down to play a game of Tournament Magic in 2016, 2017, and your opponent starts on like Fetch, Shock, Thoughtseize, there's a high likelihood they're playing which deck?
Death Shadow!
Death Shadow. The entire reason for this common opening is to lose as much life as possible, as quickly as possible, because that makes your Death Shadow grow larger and larger, becoming a 10-10 very soon.
Because Sam's able to make Death Shadow into a 10-10 and Swiss Road a 2-3. Or vice versa, like depending on who he wants to target with Become Immense.
While the deck was mostly like a balanced mid-range deck, it did have one large flaw, which was that it mostly ran 1 converted mana cost card, right? All the cards were efficient, so they cost 1. And Chalice of the Void was a popular way to beat that because that one counters all the spells that cost as much as there are charge counters on the Chalice. So you would put 1 charge counter on the Chalice of the Void, and Death Shadow just wouldn't really have an answer to it.
It was so annoying because at the time, Chalice of the Void was so good that people could play it in their main deck. So on game 1, you'd be like, ha, 1 drop, ha, 1 drop, ha, 1 drop. They'd pay 2 mana. No more 1 drop.
Yeah.
You can't play your deck anymore. It's very annoying.
Some games were even literally Ancient Tomb, pay 2 life just for 1. Next game.
Yeah. Actually, in the Best Deck Ever series, you played against Yaman playing Death Shadow, and one of the games, he just stopped playing Magic because you played Chalice on
that.
This
was fun.
How good Chalice was, yeah.
There's a bunch of answers to specifically Chalice of the Void, right? A Braid existed, like there's a bunch of artifact removal. However, many of them fell short in one axis, which is, what if your opponent just played 2 Chalice of the Voids? Like, both on 1. You can only destroy 1 with the Braid. Not an easy way around that. However, players were very sneaky in finding a very, very specific answer to this, which is Throne of Geth. Let me read the card for you because most likely you don't know what it does. It's a 2-mana artifact with a single ability. You tap it, you sacrifice an artifact, and you proliferate, which means you choose any amounts of permanents, and then you put an extra counter on each of those if they already have a counter. Now what you do is, you select all of your opponent's Chalices of the Void and put a second counter on them.
Meaning that you can play 1 drops, you can't play 2 drops anymore, neither can they actually. What if maybe they have a lot of 3 drops? You take it up to 3.
So usually the Death Shadow decks didn't even play 2 drops, really, so it didn't harm them, but all the other decks played 2 drops to get countered. Throne of Death was the only artifact usually in that deck. So it was not meant to ramp it up to anything. It was just get that Shadows away from me so I can cast my spell.
What I love about this kind of specific interaction is no one designed Throne of Get for this.
No.
They designed Throne of Get because you pump up your own creatures, you put counters on your lands, maybe you pump up your planeswalkers. So you could even play it, and if it wasn't like a seasoned Death Shadow opponent, and they just knew that they had to bring in the chalices, you'd be like, oh, that's a weird card for you to bring in, until as a madman, you tap it and then choose their 2 chalices.
You don't even have any counters to proliferate.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Number 3 is my personal favorite because I made it.
Were you the first person to ever do this interaction?
Yes, and I've never seen anybody talk or hear anything about it. And
This is exclusive card market knowledge. Get ready.
No one knows about it
the
yet.
cool part is, it looks so innocent and people didn't realize what was happening. The card, the deck we're talking about is Psychotalk. And we all know Psychotalk was a very, very strong deck. It won World's Championship 2002. And it's just one of the best decks in Standard of all time. Because your win option is just a 3-mana creature that kills instantly, and you have Upheaval to reset the board state to just win on the next turn because you float the mana and play Psychotalk and have a counter spell back up. In the same era, there was also Wake. Mirrorless Wake won Worlds 2003, and the problem was the Wake matchup was very bad against Psychotalk because Psychotalk had a million counter spells and hand disruption with Duress. So I was playing Mirrorless Wake and I was looking for an answer for that matchup because all the other matchups were really good. You played Moment's Peace, where you prevent against aggro decks. You just needed something for Psychotalk. So I was looking through the thing and I discovered Words of Worship. Words of Worship is a 3-mana, I mean, I wouldn't blame anybody for not knowing the card. It's a 3-mana card, and for 1 mana, you can skip your draw step and gain 5 life. Impressive, right?
Very impressive. You can gain so much life with that.
For 1 mana?
For 1 mana, and the sole cost of 1 mana and skipping the next card you draw, you gain 5 life.
Could you do this multiple times in 1 turn?
Whenever you draw a card.
Ah, so as a replacement effect instead of drawing.
I'm intrigued.
My mind is not yet blown.
So, what usually happens is I played Words of Worship, and my opponent was reading the card. It was a very bad card. Not that people didn't know it, people know it existed, it is a whole cycle of words, but it was just very bad.
People just knew how bad it was. Okay.
So they let it resolve, because what's the worst that can happen? Also Psychotalk, a blue-black deck, not very known for dealing with enchantments, because those can...
Once it's on the battlefield, it's there to stay.
Could you quickly read what Psychotalk does for the people who don't understand how mismatched these 2 cards seem originally?
Yes, Psychotalk, 1 blue-black, 1/2. You can exile either 2 cards from your graveyard or discard 1 card from your hand to give it +1/+1. And if you've seen our videos from that card, you can deal up to 20 damage easily in 1 turn because you drag the game on by killing, countering and stuff. And then eventually your Psychotalk needs to be blocked because it kills in 1 swoop. That was why it was so powerful. We play Words of Worship. They read the card, they look at me, think I have clearly not slept well this evening. So here's the thing. What you do from now on is you never draw any card again, ever again. You just gain 5 life. You go to 25, you go to 30. Psychotalk is a 1-power creature. Your deck and your hand is a very limited resource because at one given time, you can only deal cards you discard plus the cards you have in your graveyard.
In theory, maximum amount you could ever deal with a theoretical Psychotalk would be around like 50 plus another 25, making 75.
And that's if you ran through most of it.
That's if you spend your entire time only piling.
So if you have 8 cards in your hand, because that's how you kind of start, maybe you get it up to 10, you discard 10 cards, that's 10 damage, plus your graveyard, maybe 20 damage. So the max you effectively here is 40. As soon as you go over 40 life, you can't lose.
So I'm assuming the game plan here is you're not really winning, but since they draw way more cards, you're winning with decking.
That's the beauty. You're not drawing any cards at all. So what usually happens is they play a Psychotalk and they attack for 1. The deck plays 3 Psychotalks. 3, 4. They couldn't do more.
That's hilarious because yes, at first glance you're like, what does this do? Like there's no combo going on. It's just honest life gain.
Then eventually they do an upheaval, emergency upheaval, because to get rid of it, but then it's already too late.
I mean, in theory, upheaval would even be scary because it gives them so many cards in their hand, but their Psychotalk also gets bounced.
I love this technique because the only thing you're doing off kilter, you're hiding your strategy behind it being terrible.
Yes.
Like it's so bad that even a seasoned Magic player picks it up and goes like, I am not affected by this.
And what I loved most about it is when they realize how it works. So they play, you skip your draw step, you draw 5, and they're like, okay, you're 25, and they're not even drawing a card. How will they ever beat me? And you go to 30 and 40, and then usually they play the first cycle talk, and then they do some damage, and they realize, how the hell do I deal 40? They start counting, you see like their eyes counting, it's like the graveyard. How much will I ever deal?
Funny.
Now, number 2 is a really cool one because you're going to use your opponent's secret tech against them as an infinite mana combo. Way back in the day, back when I didn't have any gray hair, in Odyssey block, people played a card called Price of Glory. It's a classic, even Commander players still play it today. If you hate blue, which apparently a lot of you do, you get to play this enchantment for 3 mana. Whenever a player taps a land for mana during another player's turn, destroy that land. Now, a lot of mono red decks, a lot of aggro decks would bring this in against the Captain America deck at the time, or anything really that would play spells on their opponent's turn.
And there were powerful instants back then, right?
Oh boy, were they! Magic isn't made the same way it used to be. They used to not realize that instants and a bunch of draw spells weren't necessarily as fun as creature interactions were. So at the time, the creatures were hella terrible, and the instants and sorceries were really quite good. So you would bring in Price of Glory, and then your opponent would be like, oh no, all my spins are instants, I have to play them during my turn. It's very similar, for those of you who are more recent, to Teferi Time Raveler and how annoying that can be.
I mean, you could still do that, you just had to sacrifice your land.
Yeah, your counterspell also had kicker sacrifice 2 lands.
Yeah, which is not very good.
Without any kicker upside.
Yeah, just kicker was you can play the card.
But if you're really clever, have you heard of Sacred Ground?
No, that's Ground Seal I'm thinking of, no.
So they tap out, they pair the 3 mana Price of Glory, like ha ha ha, good luck having lands for the next of your turn. You pay 2 mana, you play an enchantment. It's 1 and a white, it does nothing, except for whenever a spell or ability an opponent controls causes a land to be put in your graveyard from play, return that land to play. Now normally, this is supposed to be against Stripline or something, but now, let's walk through it. Yes, you tap your land, you create an island. Oh no, you have to sacrifice your land because of Price of Glory because you did it on your opponent's turn. Oh, the land comes back. You tap your land.
And it comes in untapped?
It comes in untapped.
Oh, that's absurd.
You tap it for another mana. Oh no, I have to sacrifice it to Price of Glory. So you just play out you have infinite mana. You play out any cards you want, anything in your hand. You have a lot of draw spells. You just keep on drawing, playing all your cards. Your opponent just gave you infinite mana on their next turn.
Because it does feel like once it's your turn again, you're kind of sad because the fun times are over. There's no more infinite mana.
So if I remember correctly, there was no U-turn after that.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
You had like Fact or Fiction and all of those really strong cards, Prophetic Bolt. You basically just cycle through your deck.
Fun!
This reminds me of literally Art of War. Like you feel the strategy of your opponent, and then you're prepared. You come to battle prepared, and then you use it against them. Beautiful. Before we get to number 1, we have a hidden 6th one.
Well, it's not really hidden.
No, it's not really hidden. It's actually quite easy to find. You just have to follow the link in the description. But for reasons we couldn't include it into the video, so it's exclusive on the Cardmarket side, and you will have to tell us which place it took because it's such a cool interaction.
Oh yeah, it could have been number 2, but it also could have been number 6. I don't know. You tell us in the comments below after clicking on it. We wrote a small article about it as well.
But number 1 is so elegant and clean. So we are talking about a Rakdos Charm. And you know Rakdos Charm does 3 things.
It exiles a graveyard, it destroys an artifact.
So those were the modes that you usually lose.
Yeah, because those were actually very flexible. Or you deal 1 damage per creature your opponent controls.
Which I feel was like a fun burn spell that they threw in. It's very Rakdos, but I assume I know where you're going with this. In this case, it's not a fun, no, in this case, it is a very fun burn spell.
Yeah, so naturally charms can't be all strong options. You have 2 mana for 3 options, so they have to kind of be around that area, and some of them are clearly worse. And you used Destroy Artifact against Affinity, where there were many artifacts you want to get rid of.
Very useful.
You used Exile Graveyards, maybe even to get rid of Eldrazi's, so you as a mill deck can't do something, or your opponent dredged, whatever. So those are their uses. But they realized that card has hidden potential in the 3rd mode, and it's game breaking. So when does your opponent ever have creatures in an amount in a tournament setting that would kill you?
In 2015.
And 14 and 13.
Oh wait, actually maybe it was banned in 15 already, but
I think, but they played it at least at some point.
Yeah.
Well, they played it until they couldn't play it because it was too strong.
What are we talking about?
Have you heard of our very close friend, Splinter Twin?
I'm gonna put this Splinter Twin on this Pestermite. Do you have a response? The path to exile, show him the Dispel, and that should be the game.
Splinter Twin, what do you got? Can you kill this Deceiver Exarch, Li Shitian? All right, Antonio has assembled the combo, and that is good enough.
Yes, Splinter Twin was obviously one of the strongest modern decks of all time. And it was quite strong because, well, you didn't need to do much except for having a creature, Pestle Knight, or Deceiver Exarch, and literally Splinter Twin.
And I mean, sticking a creature in Modern sounds difficult, but at the time, the most used removal spell was Lightning Bolt, and Deceiver Exarch conveniently has 4 toughness.
Yes, so Deceiver Exarch has 1 power. How many of those powers do you need to kill an opponent in 20 life?
20 or more.
Ah, very good. Good math class, actually. But it turns out you also yourself only have, well, about 20 life. So if you have to make 20 creatures to attack, and Rakdos Charm deals 1 damage for each creature, well, you see, it's kind of lethal.
As long as you had more life than the Splinter Twin player, they would have to create a bunch of tokens to swing at you, and then you...
The way you win with this is, at the end of your turn, you pay 3 mana, you play Deceiver Exarch, it's a 1/4, and then you untap your lands, play a 4th land, play Splinter Twin, the enchantment on your Deceiver Exarch, and it allows you to tap the Deceiver Exarch to create a copy of itself, which is another Deceiver Exarch, and when it enters the battlefield, you get to tap or untap target permanent. So you untap the original Deceiver Exarch, tap it again for another one, that untaps your Deceiver Exarch, then taps again for another one, and untaps your Deceiver Exarch, and you make infinite Deceiver Exarch, and usually attack for lethal. And the fun thing here, I remember at the time, because I played a lot of Modern at the time, is you couldn't just say, I make infinite. In tournament rules, you had to say an amount. So you'd be like, I make 69,000 Deceiver Exarch. And you're like, oh, okay, you take 69,000 damage, which is the most fun. They're like, what? You're like,
which even happened, I remember that when you were on a lower life total than they were, they just still made 1,000 because it was so hidden to use Rakdos Charm like this. The first time you had to see it to remember, okay, I don't want to do that.
And once you remembered, well, every time you'd be like, oh, how many tokens do I actually need to create?
It's such a beautiful thing, especially because Rakdos Charm was not meant to do this, but suddenly it did this, and then it was good for any of the 3 modes against any matchup.
And it also made for such an explosive finish to all those games.
Yeah.
So those were our 5 things people outsmarted the opponent with, and if you want to see more, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video. I really like that Splinter Twin just was strong enough either way. It's like they just banned it.
They just banned it.
Well, see, because eventually the players playing Splinter Twin and just be like, I'll need 2 extra mana for Counterspell or something. They realized they could play around Rakdos Charm.